Senati Lole-Taylor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak to the Social Security Fraud Measures and Debt Recovery Amendment Bill in this committee stage. It would be fair to say, Mr. Chair, that the days when people used to say that trust us, we know what we're doing, have long gone. It is very hard to support anyone who comes up with the same phrase or a similar statement, given the fact that it could lead or it could create difficult situations for others. It's not always for the same person that had actually said it, but it's always for others, especially when it comes to benefit. Now, this part of the bill focuses on the essence of fraud, and when it occurs, is also the other part that's very important. And at the same time, it caters for efforts towards recovering the debts. New Zealand First believes that those knowingly and purposely taking advantage of the welfare assistance should be held accountable for their actions, and they should be made to actually show that they are accountable to the taxpayers of this country. At the same time, we believe it's important to ensure that we understand the possible circumstances people may be in when they contemplate fraudulent behaviour. Now, some of the reasons may include, number one, sudden redundancy or the inability to secure employment. And we all know that there's not enough jobs out there at the moment. And let's be clear also that there aren't enough jobs because the National has not invested enough efforts to create jobs for the wider population of New Zealand. Number two is changes to family circumstances, and that means in the area of death or relationships breakdown. Now, death is something that's uncontrollable, but relationships breakdown is often a result of both parties unable to agree on a number of areas. While some might carry on to become good parents or good people, others will respond violently and often lead to domestic or family violence. Number three is unstable relationships, where neither mum or dad would like to move in. And it's a sense of insecurity for both partners or both parties. This is where both parents do not want to be tied to one particular person's perspective. Most time, one of the parents is either a gang member or a drug dealer, and there is also a situation where the mother could be involved with other kind of job options like prostitution. The number four is that huge debt and poor financial literacy and lack of budget management skills or management experience can also be major contributing factors. There's quite a large number of people in this category. These people may have become parents so early in their lives or did not necessarily finish their education in order to be able to secure better jobs, and therefore often they will find themselves unable to translate or to interpret various legislation, especially when it comes to budget and spending from the Social Welfare Department. Number five is that in some cases, serious alcohol and drug abuse or addiction could also be contributing factors. Now, on the other hand, there may be mental illness involved, and those are circumstances that's very hard to judge. Legal highs can definitely send someone's mind completely mad, regardless of what the legislators may say. Mr. Chair, it is important to point out again that relationships are never simple or straightforward, particularly for people in broken homes. Now, I heard the Minister earlier tonight talked about the relationships breakdown, in particular the woman in a violent relationship, then that woman is not liable for the fraud. I do challenge I want to challenge the minister in this instance, because often we talk about the situation where it's always the man, Mr. Chair.
Lole-Taylor.
It's always the man that's the violent partner, when in some cases women could also be the violent partners in a relationship, and therefore the father could end up being the victim in any situation. There's an ongoing perception that we need to actually look at shutting down or getting rid of the barrier that's allowing us to think that women are always supposed to be the victims and men are supposed to be the violent partners. The bill must be sensitive to these situations. The changes must be seen to be supportive of either the man or a woman, depending on who it is, who may be in violent relationships, and enable them to make the right decision. In the first reading, Honourable Jester Burrows gave an assurance that those in violent relationships will be given fair and serious consideration, and that is really good to hear. The Select Committee's report, if I could say so, stated in terms of amendment to the debt recovery provision, says that we believe that this would ensure that the amendment did not undermine the general public law principle that decision makers must take all relevant consideration into account. Now, this is the part of the actual Select Committee that we thought it was quite useful for us to accept. It would also alleviate any concerns about the legislation breaching New Zealand's international human rights obligations by ensuring that matters pertaining to such rights could be taken into account where necessary. And I have discussed this bill with a number of our community leaders and a number of our local residents. As you would know, Mr. Chair, a large number of our people in my area in Manukau East and South Auckland, and also some in Porirua, can be in this category, can be affected by this legislation. Welfare fraud is something New Zealand First does not take lightly. In fact, it is completely intolerable. Welfare fraud is a crime often committed by people for their own benefit at the expense of taxpayers' expense. But the vast majority of beneficiaries are honest people who do the right thing. New Zealand First is mindful that this is not such a clear-cut issue. Despite the bill's best intentions, it still poses huge risk to people in genuine need of welfare assistance. The bill must accurately targeted towards those who are abusing the system. And this is where we have to be careful that we are not pulling up the people who are trying to survive in this current environment where the cost of living is so high and they could be bullied into getting funds from when they are not supposed to. It is absolutely vital that New Zealand welfare reaches the people who actually need it rather than those dishonest people who would continue to take what they are not entitled to. And I believe that the bill will go some long way to assist those who are in real need for support. It is also important that we acknowledge that saving that reached $109 million in 2012 to 2013 was a welcome, but there's also $120 million that is still owing to the Ministry of Social Development. Is that going to be taken on board? Are we going to give that some consideration? And however, we must be mindful that 2/3 of welfare fraud is not relationship fraud. In fact, a lot of money is lost on administrative blunders. And that comes down to staff and the way they manage their responsibility in the actual WINS office. If the government persists on taking this hardline approach to sorting out our welfare system, then they must indeed ensure that there are enough jobs and so on to actually allow beneficiaries to find a way out of the quagmire that is welfare dependency. We must also acknowledge the idea that most New Zealanders would not cheat the system if they felt like they did not need it. Most of them are actually honest if they are in a situation where they do need the assistance from the government. The deeper social problems that rely on the welfare system and rely on the welfare fraud ought to be recognised. Sadly, there are no jobs, and many families are struggling to save the 20% deposit for a house at the moment. So it is up to us to ensure that our people actually get the support.
Poto Williams.
Pleasure to take a call on the